everyone, this is Dr. Liz, and you're listening to Include with Dr. Liz. This show is about everyone, all people, including you. It's about people and their diverse lived experience in this world. I chat with guests to get to know them, their identities, and their inclusion needs, so we all have an opportunity to understand how best to include them, so together we can create a world where everyone thrives. Patrice is an introverted, racial minority and LGBTQI identifying, cartoon-loving, sloppy Joe hating, non-binary transgender LinkedIn influencer. Married to the love of her life, Patrice's favourite thing to do on weekends is sleep. An assistant dean of a school of business where she applies her superpower of empathy with her students every day. Welcome, Patrice. How did you become a LinkedIn voice of influence?
By accident. So it actually started because working in the College of Business, I was at the time over a student organization. And so in that student organization, they asked them to, hey, get a really good LinkedIn profile. Well, most of the folks who were in my student organization were racial minorities, ethnic minorities, people of color, Black, Indigenous, Latin folks were in that space, and they didn't really get it. Like, there was no explanation. Right. It's just like, yeah, get a LinkedIn profile, make sure it's up to date. And so for me as a instructor, I was like, well, I'm not going to tell you to do something that I actually don't have or understand. So I started playing with it to figure out, okay, what's the easiest way to teach students how to utilize this? What does it actually do? And while that was happening, we, kind of fell into the pandemic, the social unrest and political unrest was happening. And I didn't get a chance. I couldn't talk to my students. I couldn't talk to faculty and staff anymore. And so I started posting the things that I probably would have said at a water cooler. Okay. And having interactions with people from that. And so that's literally how it kind of blew up. I got some, hey, this is great, to some threatening DMs. But it was one of those things where I truly felt like if I only listen to the good voices, I won't grow. Okay. And so I do need to have those folks who don't agree with me, so that it forces me, at least even if I want to tell you off, I got to do some research. So it's forcing me to have to continue doing some more work in order to have a better script to have conversations.
Tell me about the hate. Like, what does that look like?
What does the hate look like? I've been threatened on LinkedIn with all types of violence. It's always very violent things. It's not just like, I don't like this and you should stop. It's violent. Like, I'm going to make you not do this. And at first, I would meet that with, like, where you want to meet up at. Like, if we about to do this, let's do it. Like, don't be a keyboard gangster. I'm like this in real life. So if this is what we about to do, show up, pull up. That's honestly how I first approached it. My wife told me I can't do that. Pull up, like, if that's what we doing. But I realized, one, you can't solve, like, you can't meet violence with violence, because we will continue just to be violent all the time, right? That would become absolutely the norm. So I honestly started asking people, like, clarify, like, where did we miss each other? And so that's what I started asking. I was like, this is exactly the same thing I would do if we were in person in a social setting, where if you come yelling at me, I can't meet you with that. So I'm not going to be a keyboard gangster either. I'm going to be try to be as intelligent and empathetic as I possibly can, and get to know things. That actually helped probably diffuse like 70% of some of the things. There are some people who just was like, you know what, I hate you and I'm going to continue to hate you. Then there were other folks that were like, oh, I appreciate you actually having a conversation. I came to you wrong and I apologize, because that's not what I intended to do. I was angry. And so, like, also having that, and I got quite a few followers that were just like, oh, you actually are not trying to also berate me the way that I was berating you. Okay, maybe I could do this differently. So I'm like, okay, a 70 is a C. I could pass with a C. Yeah, I'm okay with that.
Degrees are made with C's.
C's definitely get degrees.
Okay, so what do you think their misunderstandings or their anger mostly comes from?
Fear. The fear of not being included, right? It's when we get expansive and we start saying, hey, everybody deserves a voice, everybody deserves to be seen and heard. Then people who are used to being seen and heard and having a voice feel like that, then the balance is going to shift to the other side, because that's how the hierarchy has always been. It's always been somebody at the top and someone at the bottom. And if we're saying we're actually going to stop going from the top to bottom and just be, very linear and say everybody gets a space, we don't know what that looks like. And so because of that, that fear is, you're going to force me at the bottom and I'm not going to be oppressed. I'm not going to be traumatized, because they've heard it. They know what we've said, and they know that this is bad. I believe James Baldwin said, white folks may not know anything that's going on in the world, but they know they don't want to be Black. Yeah. They know that part, because they know what happens. So even if they don't know all the nuances, they know that that's just bad, and I don't want to be in that place. And so I felt like, even in some conversations where I thought I was being as inclusive as I possibly could, folks were still feeling excluded. And a lot of it was our terminology around words. Like, we was like, we want to hold people accountable. Literally, people were saying, how you going to hold me accountable? You going to put a gun to my head? What? How did you get that from accountability?
Yeah.
But it's that forced violence on the only way we can make people accountable is to hurt them in some way. And in that hurt, they concede. And I'm like, no, that's not how that works. Accountability goes hand in hand with responsibility. Once you understand and you've been given something, you now are responsible for it. Under that responsibility, now you are accountable to ensuring that X, Y, and Z then happens. Okay. And so, like, actually having to have that conversation with people, I didn't know that there were so many people that didn't know that. I thought that was a given, but I can't tell you how many, particularly men, who were like, how are you going to make me accountable? I want you to try and make me do something. And I was like, I didn't even use the word make. I just said this. And so it evolves from that.
The insight of acknowledging that people are possibly coming from the piece of pie, that they have to give up something for someone else to be included, rather than it being an abundance mindset where there's enough for everybody. So I find that powerful. So thank you. I wonder that their approach to coming back at, how much of that could also be influenced by the activist approach of people that have been having to fight for inclusion, that they're mirroring in their own minds that approach. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I was Paulo Freire, the language of the oppressed. How folks, you will weaponize certain things because they know how that shows up. So if I say I'm triggered, that makes people look. If I'm saying that you are, there's some type of oppression or appropriation happening, even when they don't know what those words mean, because it's used so often. I was actually doing a session with a group, and they kept using the term gaslighting. Yeah, I'm getting gaslit all the time. And so my question was, define gaslighting, because I want to make sure we're on the same page. And the amount of people who didn't know what it meant was staggering. And I was like, in my head, I'm thinking, well, then why are you using that? Why are you using a term that you honestly don't know, like, what it means, but you've heard it and you know what happens when you say it. You know how people's, ears, perk up when that's said. You know how people will rush to your defense when it's said. So you utilize it without knowing it and truly weaponizing it. And because it's been weaponized so much, the people who it actually is happening to don't get a chance to actually utilize the verbiage that fits their scenario, right?
It's a bit like the term white privilege.
Like, people don't truly understand privilege. They don't understand that the construct of whiteness, and they take it personal. It's like, I'm talking about, there's a literal system at play, not you. And let's talk about all the ethnicities that you show up with that we don't talk about. Fun story. I was doing a session at a university, and I was talking about identity, and I was talking about the construct of whiteness. And I just was like, what if I told you that white people don't exist? And I started talking about ethnic minorities and folks from Eastern European and Western European countries, and what that means to have those traditions, and how whiteness doesn't have a culture, right? And I got a call from a parent. Did you tell my son he wasn't white? Ma'am, that is not how that happened. Let me explain what happened. But she was like, he came home and was like, I'm not white, mom. And it was like, what happened?
But I will help you with that, because the idea of black and white, or talking about a racial identity, is really only an American thing.
Yes, it is.
So I come here and I fill out forms now, and I'm always asked what color my skin is. It just feels strange to me, because I actually don't identify as white. I identify as Australian. Like, I identify as my nationality. And I think it's really interesting, and obviously because the US is such a large population, that they've created something that the rest of the world doesn't tend to subscribe to.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's hard for folks to think outside of that. And it's really hard to, even when we talk about DEI globally, right? It's really hard because we truly have a Western lens of how everyone is seen. And it's like, nah, that's not how it looks like when everybody is of the same nationality. There's other isms that come into play. And we harp on this because I think as Americans, we hyphenate. Yeah. Everybody's hyphenated in America. Yeah. You can't just be American. You have to be a hyphen of something.
Okay, well, now we're talking about people of color. I sent you a questionnaire before we started the podcast. Big long list of identities, and I asked you to tick which ones you identify with. And you ticked 4. What were they?
Being non-binary transgender, a part of the LGBTQIA community, and racial minority.
Okay. Now, we're actually friends, so I have to sort of disclose that, which means I know another part of you that you didn't tick, and I asked you about it off air. So why didn't you tick disability?
Yes, because I am a recently disabled person. And so I think for me, the identities that I ticked were all identities I felt like I was born into. Like I always have been a part of the community, even if I didn't have the language for it. I've always been a part of these communities in some way, shape, or form. Being a recently disabled person as of May 16th of 2022, actually, I had a stroke for folks, and I can still pretty much pass as a able-bodied human being. Like, people don't ever ask me things, even when I'm limping a little bit, or I'm kind of holding my arm just a little bit to myself. I can still use my hands and arms freely, but sometimes I go through muscle spasms, things like that. I can pass, and it's an easy world to pass in.
You can hide it.
I don't have to talk about it. It's not something I was born into. And so we were talking about this prior to. It's something that I am still trying to reconcile with. That this is a new identity that I have, and I'm always looking at things that on a spectrum. Like, being Black is not for me is not a spectrum, even though there are folks who are fairer skinned than I am and have other cultural and ethnic understandings that are different from mine. I look at myself in the mirror and I'm Black. I look at myself in the mirror and I'm a part of the LGBTQ community. I look at myself, I'm a non-binary transgender person. I am still trying to find this person who has a disability. I because even when I do look disabled, I'll fix it if I can see it. And it is something that has affected my pride, and that in a way that I didn't even think it would happen. I've been completely independent my whole life, and so to have to depend on somebody else, and I'm 39 years old, I have to depend on somebody else. I'm at the height of my career. I'm doing things that I've never done before, and I'm enjoying myself. And all of a sudden, I'm in a hospital bed and I can't move and I can't talk and I'm stuck. And I'm just like, this cannot be the final chapter. This is not how it's supposed
It's
to
not
end.
the final chapter, I
Right.
promise you.
But yeah, it is. And I appreciate you. I appreciate you allowing me to see that. This is probably the first time since my accident I've actually had to say out loud that I am a disabled person. So now I think it puts a different responsibility on me. Maybe a accountability that I didn't want. That's because I could pass as able-bodied. So when things didn't happen in things were happening to the disabled world, that didn't affect me. It wasn't my lived experience. It wasn't anybody close to me's lived experience.
Yeah.
And so I felt bad. I was like, we got to do something about it. But now it's me.
As a teacher of university students now, do you think you might look at your students or make allowances for students that perhaps they may need that you might not have identified before because disability wasn't a lens for you?
Yeah, I think now I would definitely say I'm probably more empathetic. I thought I was empathetic before, right? I thought that I was doing enough. And I truly think I was doing enough for an able-bodied person, which was for many of us, and I'll definitely make an I statement, I was doing the bare minimum. If it wasn't directly in my face, it didn't affect me. I can't tell you how many friends I have right now that have known disabilities, mobility or mental disability that I know of. They possibly have them. I just don't know of them. We don't talk about them.
Yeah.
So it wasn't something that I talked about. It wasn't a community that I was a part of in any way. And so now there is a guilt of I should have done better. Very much so. But also there's a fire of responsibility, like, nah, you gotta do it. Now you gotta make sure that these things are. So working with students, I think this is now going to be interwoven deeper into my curriculum than it was before. Because before we kind of, we talk about disability rights and we talk about all of these opportunities, but we don't talk about how disability rights have been tied directly to the civil rights movement. That's literally what they use as a precedent to get ADA compliance of, like, cannot discriminate based on disability. Was added onto that because of so many kids, particularly, who were segregated in classrooms, particularly in education, separated and segregated disability from education. And so as an educator who now has a disability, it is my job. I am accountable to bring it back to my curriculum and to ensure that it's a part of the curriculum that I am also a part of, which is education.
So here's the challenge I put, not just to you, but to everyone that may ever listen to this podcast, is that I don't believe, so the way I approach inclusion, I don't need to be a person of color. I don't need to identify as queer or have a disability or be on spectrum or to be accountable for including the needs of all people.
Absolutely.
So with that in mind, I want to ask you a few questions around how we can, and I say we, me, collective, the world, better meet your needs so you thrive. Now, you've said it more than once, and I say it all the time as well, that you can't speak for the whole of the community that is all of those identifiers that makes up Patrice. But Patrice can speak for Patrice and people similar to you.
Yes.
All right. So looking at your whole self, Patrice, not just those things that you are comfortable identifying with.
Yes.
Do you now feel that you can always physically access what you need to access? And if not, how could a workplace, for instance, better meet those needs for you?
And again, as someone who is new to this, when I thought about accommodations, I thought about accommodations in a way of, how do you make me fit? Like, how do you adjust the environment so that I can also fit in instead of centering me? And as I think now more, I'm like, if we center folks who are the most vulnerable, we can help a lot more people.
Yes.
Instead of the other way around, like, oh, let's get the dominant identity in here and then we'll build we'll attach something to everybody else. And so I think that's a big thing, is that we need to look at it from who are your most vulnerable, who are the folks who are missing. I think of truly centering. And I think something you said before is like, I didn't have to be a part of the community to want to be of service in some way. I would say I was the same way. But when you live it, it feels different. That lived experience does something, and it opens up a perspective that you didn't even know you were missing. And I truly didn't know I was missing that perspective until I had to go through it. Now I understand all the gaps that are in healthcare. Now I'm noticing the gaps that are in, just a regular environment.
So Patrice, if I look down on your Zoom name, next to it, it says they, them, theirs. Can you explain that to people, and how we need to use them, and when I get it wrong, what I should do?
So they, them, theirs is a way, as a non-binary person, I identify. I do not identify solely as female, even though I was assigned female at birth and have lived as a girl, have lived as a woman, particularly a Black girl, Black woman. I don't wholly identify with that. When I look in the mirror, there's a piece missing with that. The same thing with male. I was not socialized male. I'm not male. I recognize that, but it feels easier to digest in some ways. So when people call me sir, it's not this like visceral reaction of like, oh my goodness, as if someone calls me miss or ma'am. And I can't explain it. I truly don't know why there's this feeling of difference when I hear it, but I know that I have not had the socialization of maleness, and nor do I identify with the male community in totality. So I really identify as non-binary, a person who doesn't solely fall into either of these binary characters. And that's really what non-binary is. It's taking yourself out of the binary. And some people will say, oh, well, if you're not binary and you're not binary, then that's still the two. And it's like, no, there's actually a spectrum of words that we use. And some people call it like the alphabet soup of queer identity, of like, there's so many different things. How would you know? We are learning, and we are learning how to name things. When you name things, you can actually account for them. It makes sense now. When you don't know the name of something, it's one of the things, like if you were diagnosed with something, or you've been sick, I'll say that. You've been sick for years, and you've gone to all these different doctors, and the doctors can't tell you what's wrong with you. There's a frustration in not knowing what is wrong with me, what is happening to me. The minute that somebody, even if it's a devastating diagnosis, the minute that you know what this is, there's a relief, because you got a word for it now. That's what that means. That's why I did that. And it's the same thing with us when it comes to the gender spectrum of like, we use all of these words because we are now figuring out that this is how we are and this is who we are. So for me, I use they, them instead of the she series pronouns or he series pronouns. And so when people say it, and it's so funny because if you go back to this, you actually called me she like 5 times in a row.
Did I?
Yes.
I was trying to be so conscious of using your name.
Yes. So this is the part that is endearing for me, right? So many people are like, there are some people who, when they hear it, it really like, it throws them off. For me, I use they, them. That is what I use exclusively. But I have learned that I don't have an aversion to being called she.
Okay.
I don't have an aversion to being called he. This is what I exclusively use. But if someone were to call me she or he, I am at a resolve in my life is that I am those things. I'm not them solely. Okay. But there are parts of me that are very feminine. There are parts of me that follow what it means to be a she, her. Yeah. And so when I hear it, it doesn't hurt like it used to. Okay. But I think that's my own evolution. What I would say for folks is that you practice. Just practice. Just like anything else. What you're doing now is you've categorized me based on my voice, based on my mannerisms, based on my height. I ain't the tallest person in the world. You've characterized, this is what she looks like.
Yeah.
So what you're doing is you're now trying to tell your eyes that that's not what you see.
Yeah.
And so it's really hard for some people because they're like, that's what I see, so that's what I'm going to say. No, because the minute you figure it out, the same way if you have a woman who gets married and she changes her last name, there's an abruptness to you changing it because you recognize the value in it.
Good one,
right?
Patrice. Yeah.
The value in it. The same thing with animals. I can't tell you how many times that folks will misgender my dog.
And you correct
and then
them, right?
Like, oh, it's a guy, it's a boy. And they're like, oh my God, I am so sorry. I had no idea. And there is like a visceral, I will get it right. You will never have to have that problem out of me again. And then I was like, oh, I use they, them. And they're like, I don't get it. That doesn't make sense.
Okay, I love this. That is an awakening for me because my dog is a male dog. But therefore, I refer to all dogs as boys.
Yes.
Right?
It does. It happens all the time.
Wow. It is such an awakening. And I really want to revisit that I am acutely aware of knowing your identity and that you're a they there. And I do practice offline, not just for you, the other people that I know that are transgender and or non-binary, very conscious of making sure I'm practicing using their name. That's what I'm trying to use. Replace the reference of the person to using their actual name, just in case I don't have to think about flicking from the gender reference and just focus on the name. Do you have any other tips for people other than practicing and focusing on using your name? Maybe when we do get it wrong, do we fix it in the moment? What do we say?
There are some folks who are very confrontational with it. They're like, this is not, my pronouns. How dare you? Then there are some folks like me who I let the person self-correct.
Okay.
Like I let them think through it because I know there are times when, and I think at least folks who are assigned female at birth have been in a situation where someone has miss, ma'am, lady, sweethearted, something to the effect of letting you know we are different or there's a difference in our gender. And there's a feeling that comes with that, especially when it becomes patronized. Like, all right, sweetheart, that's enough. Where you're just like, are you serious? So there's a feeling that comes with that. So for me, I follow the feeling. Was it truly a mistake, a misstep, a mispronunciation? Or is it like, I'm gonna remind you that you're not what you're saying you are. So for me, that's what I truly rely on. All I can say for folks is you practice, and practice does not make perfect. It does not make perfect. Practice makes repetitive.
Okay.
That's it. And so when you have that misstep, either because because let me raise my hand and say, I do it. I do it to non-binary people. I do it to trans folks. I do it to folks who I may have known in one gender and have transitioned. Folks who dress or sound slightly different from what the pronouns they go. I do it all the time. My wife, great advocate, loves me to death. She and hers me to death sometimes without noticing, like truly doesn't notice. And so you have to recognize where that comes from. And so all you can have people do is to become repetitive in it, to begin to use it in everyday language, and try. That's it. You're going to get it wrong. That's not to me, statement. To me, it does not, I don't mark a person down because they get it wrong. I get a whole bunch of shit wrong every day. And I still have grace, and people still have grace with me. I do it to myself sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's coming out in every podcast that we have, that we're all on an inclusion journey all of the time.
Yes.
There's no end state to this.
Yes.
If I don't have lived experience on any of your identities, let's say, what could I do better to include you? Like if you had 3 top tips that I could do to better create space for you to thrive?
The first thing I would say is get in proximity to people who don't look like you, don't have your same identities. Like you really have to get in proximity to these folks, not just reach out. Hey, I saw you on this thing. Like us, for instance, we met online and then it was like, let's go get something to eat. Let's let's talk, let's get to know each other. We got in proximity. And so like when I had my accident, I called you. I said, hey, this happened to me. When my wife's my father-in-law died, I talked to you. I said, hey, this happened to me. You were in proximity with me. And there was a connection there. The second thing is to recognize the good things that you've done. Yes, I've done these things. These are great. But also recognizing there's more to do. And what do I need to do to be more aware of what I don't know?
Yeah.
As a researcher, you gotta continuously be up on your job, right? You gotta continuously know how to do research. What are the new trends happening? But we don't do that with people. We don't do that. We don't, like that's one of the reasons why people be like, oh, I hate how language is changing. Yeah, if you talk it, you get it. But if you're not talking, you don't even recognize that these changes have happened. So that means that you're not involved in the evolution of some of these things. That is something that you also have to do. And so if you want to be an activist, if you're going to be an advocate, you got to know who you're advocating for. You got to be really, really dialed into that. So that would be the second part of really, truly understanding where you lie in this fight. And then thirdly, I truly think to make this space more inclusive, you have to be inclusive of you. There are so many folks who aren't even inclusive of themselves. They don't know who they are. They don't know about all their identities. They've never explored them. There so many people are like, this is how I've always been. This is the family I've always been a part of. This is the community I've always interacted with. They don't even know themselves. And so how can you advocate for me when you can't do it for you? So that would be my third thing is like, you gotta know you.
We know we could talk for hours and underwater.
Yes.
But we don't want to bore people and we want to try to keep to time. So I want to recap with 3 of the best takeaways that I am taking away today from our conversation. And I really firstly like the one about proximity and, broadening our own exposure to people that are different to us. That wasn't a conscious thing for me with you. Believe it or not, it was, I don't know if you recall, but when I reached out to you, it was because I moved to Colorado and I didn't know anyone. And so I was just reaching out to people that worked in the same kind of field as me because I thought there'd be a values alignment, which clearly there was.
Yeah.
But I feel privileged to call you as a friend. And I hope you liked those cinnamon scrolls that I sent to you.
Hell yeah, I tore them up. Plus, it's funny because you are the first person I know from Australia. I didn't know anyone from Australia.
One of the other things is about that grace, having just having grace with ourselves, having grace with others. Removing the fear of getting it wrong. You've got to try to get inclusion right, and if you get it wrong, that's okay. You just try again. Yeah, absolutely. And the third one is really, really powerful, and I think it's a learning you're going to take away today too, if I dare say so, is that we need to understand ourselves and our own needs and our own identities. And sure, you're saying that you knew a whole bunch about yourself, and now you have a new identity to identify with and take on board. And if I was to give any summary for me, that's even where my understanding came from with inclusion, where I observed someone else's discrimination. And to try to understand that experience, I flipped the dial to look at my own potential identities, which I'd never really stepped into understanding as, and I would just say, a woman in what I was doing in work. And when I realized actually there were genuine barriers that were put in place that prevented me from achieving certain things, I went, hang on, I have been affected by this inclusion-exclusion thing. And so when we start to see that, we recognize when we are accountable for creating inclusion for all people. Thank you so much for your time, Patrice.
Always.
And I think that's it for us today.
Awesome.